Tonight, closing in on the source of the Ruby Princess outbreak. Police dramatically widen their investigation into the cruise ship. Good evening, I'm Jeremy Fernandez. This is ABC News. The number of confirmed cases double at a Sydney nursing home where a staff member worked while infected. The coronavirus shutdown claims the state's oldest regional newspaper. And how's this for home delivery? Shipping containers arrive to shelter bushfire victims while their houses are rebuilt.
It's wonderful, yeah. It's going to be so good.
Police have dramatically broadened the criminal investigation into the Ruby Princess cruise ship to find the source of the COVID-19 outbreak. They'll now investigate the cruise immediately before the voyage that resulted in a massive coronavirus cluster. All passengers and crew will be quizzed to see if there was evidence the virus was already on board and whether the ship should have been allowed to sail again. Amy Greenbank reports.
Prime position.
Wow, we're on the 14th floor.
On an earlier voyage of the Ruby Princess. This was the cruise before the ill-fated trip, linked to 20 deaths and more than 600 infections. Passengers from both voyages will now be drawn into a criminal investigation.
This is going to be an investigation like no other because of the sheer numbers of those that will be providing evidence.
Almost 6,000 people will be sent this electronic survey and asked what they saw while on board.
The investigation itself will focus on any allegation or any information pertaining to criminal negligence.
More than 150 passengers from the first Ruby Princess trip reported feeling sick when they disembarked in Sydney on the 8th of March. Those waiting to board the second cruise that went on to have the outbreak asked staff if anyone had been unwell.
The answer was definitely no. No one was quarantined and no one was sick.
Travellers say they had to wait 7 hours before boarding as the ship underwent a deep clean.
I straight out, point blank, asked them, I said, does this have to do with coronavirus? Are there any cases on board? Have the previous passengers? And they just, lovingly, just with a smile said, there are no issues.
New South Wales Health says no known cases of coronavirus have been linked to the earlier cruise, but it's unclear if that includes overseas travellers who returned home or crew who remained on board.
We've always had issues with that first cruise because New South Wales Health allowed that cruise to depart, despite knowing that there were unwell people on board in the middle of a pandemic.
4 more Ruby Princess crew members have tested positive, taking the total of 6 staff members to 153. Police believe the source of the outbreak was probably a waiter or an employee involved in serving food. When that crew member got sick and who knew is the likely linchpin in this investigation. Amy Greenbank, ABC News, Sydney.
The number of COVID-19 cases has doubled at an aged care home in Western Sydney, where an infected staff member worked for nearly a week while sick. Across Australia, it was another day under 50 new cases, which makes it 6 days straight. There have now been more than 6,500 cases nationwide. New South Wales is edging towards 3,000 cases. The latest group of infections includes a 7-week-old baby.
2,926 people have now had coronavirus in New South Wales. Among the 29 new cases, a baby boy, born just 7 weeks ago.
And the baby is a close contact of known cases. The source of that infection for that family cluster is not known.
Also included in the latest cases are 15 new infections at Anglicare's Newmarch House in Caddens. The virus has now spread to 20 residents and 10 staff members at the centre.
Obviously, there's been extensive testing in that aged care facility, and that we will may see new cases be reported.
The cluster broke out after a staff member worked 6 shifts with mild symptoms before she was diagnosed.
The situation there potentially could become very ugly because more and more people are getting infected. The question really is, what is the regulatory response going to be to this?
The state government's been calling for increased testing, and it appears the message has been received.
Yesterday, 4,988 of you came forward and got tested. Can I thank you? That is outstanding.
Today, the second drive-through testing clinic opened at Macquarie Park in Sydney's north. And in the inner west, construction began on the first purpose-built COVID-19 testing centre.
The intention is that this will remain structurally sound, and any flatbed truck will allow this to be moved to a roadside rest stop, a park, a unused street, anywhere.
The Premier says she wants students to return to face-to-face learning from week 3 of term 2. There's still no plan illustrating how that will happen, but it's clear full classrooms won't be an option. A roster system is among the ideas being studied.
What we are considering are options around a rostering system which will have some students go back on a particular day to increase that level of face-to-face.
She says the alternative could have students facing up to a year or more at home. Lily Mayers, ABC News, Sydney.
Police are responding to more calls for help from people experiencing family violence during the coronavirus lockdown. Some support groups say there's been a 25% increase in demand for their services. Tonight, there's some relief available for people escaping dangerous situations.
Tali Starr knows what it's like to be at home with an abusive partner.
You feel trapped, basically. You just feel like you can't get away. One of the things they do is that they try to make you feel like you're crazy.
It'd be so much harder, she says, in lockdown.
It's a very pressurised situation. So perpetrators are often always on the edge anyway. So you add a real melting pot of not being able to go out, being stuck in a small space. It's much more triggered situations, so they're going to go much quicker.
We're actually seeing an increase in the reports of domestic and family violence incidents, which means police are responding to more calls.
Authorities say perpetrators now have more time at home, more time to drink, and
the anxiety caused by an increase in unemployment means that this was always going to be a risk to the community.
But just as more space is needed, in the COVID crisis, emergency shelters have less room.
Social distancing does limit the number of people who can stay in many crisis accommodations because they are shared facilities.
With few tourists to fill their rooms, hotels are stepping in to help. The New South Wales government is spending almost $15 million on temporary accommodation over the next 15 months. Those hotel rooms are available across the state from today.
We've been overwhelmed with support from the private sector. Hundreds of hotels have offered their support, so there's hundreds of hotels who are on this register and are available.
A small piece of sanctuary in the most difficult of times. Jessie Dorset, ABC News, Sydney.
And if you need crisis accommodation or other help with family violence, you can contact the New South Wales Domestic Violence Helpline. There's a bit more activity in Australia's skies tonight following the government's $165 million airline lifeline. It'll keep routes into all capital cities airborne through subsidised flights by Qantas and Virgin. But there are still concerns the latest assistance doesn't go far enough because regional centres are at risk of seeing empty airports shut down.
A Virgin flight touches down in Melbourne after the government provided $165 million to get some domestic planes back in the air. 220 flights a week, with those who've been in quarantine after arriving from overseas uppermost in the government's mind.
If they landed in Sydney and required to get back to Perth with very limited services available, it's a long drive in a hire car over the Nullarbor.
For loss-making Virgin, which is billions of dollars in debt, getting some of these planes back in the air may offer some short-term relief, but there's a real risk that many will stay grounded permanently.
I'm here on their behalf today to ask the Prime Minister to step in and to save Virgin Airlines.
As a group of Labor MPs gathered at Brisbane Airport to support the thousands of workers who lose their jobs if Virgin goes to the wall, unions, Virgin management and industry experts were meeting online and calling for the government to take a stake in Virgin.
There are over 600,000 people in the tourism industry here that rely on healthy, robust
an extensive airline network.
If we have a monopoly situation in this country, evidence shows that airfares will be between 20 and 30% more.
With potential buyers of Virgin circling, the government so far is refusing the carrier's request for a $1.4 billion bailout. While Virgin's fight for survival has grabbed the headlines, the airports that both it and Qantas fly to are also being hit hard. They're empty. And for many regional areas, such as Dubbo in Western New South Wales, it's a huge issue.
We're the headquarters for the Royal Flying Doctor Service. We've also got a large RFS contingency here. We've got an essential airport for Western New South Wales. We need to keep that viable.
The pressure continues to mount on Canberra to loosen the purse strings even further. Andrew Robertson, ABC News.
In the United States, the enormous economic toll of coronavirus continues to grow, with new data showing more than 22 million people have filed for unemployment benefits in just the past 4 weeks. Now, President Donald Trump has announced new guidelines to try to get people back to work. North America correspondent James Glenday reports.
From coast to coast, unprecedented numbers of Americans are turning up at food banks after taking a hefty pay cut or being laid off.
You know, I don't have any income coming in. I don't get any food stamps. So it's just hard to get, any help right now.
Another 5.2 million filed for unemployment benefits last week. The global financial crisis of more than a decade ago is looking like a blip compared to the past month. More than 22 million in total have now lost their jobs.
That's about the size of the population of Florida in just the last 4 weeks filing unemployment claims.
The president, who's under growing pressure, today put forward guidelines on how to get the nation back open for business.
We are not opening all at once, but one careful step at a time.
His administration will pay to rapidly ramp up testing, and it wants states to ease social distancing restrictions in 3 distinct gradual phases, though it doesn't specify when this should happen.
Instead of a blanket shutdown, we will pursue a focus on sheltering the highest risk individuals, so important.
The announcement represents a backdown for Donald Trump. In it, he finally conceded that the White House doesn't actually control coronavirus lockdowns. State governors call all the shots, and several of them have made it crystal clear things won't be getting properly back to normal for a long time. Amid the carnage here, one industry is booming. Some funeral homes are offering drive-through casket viewing.
And it's not a lot of interaction with people, but I think they are liking it because they do get to say goodbye to their loved ones.
For the 3rd consecutive day, more than 2,000 were killed by the coronavirus across America. The country's total death toll is now more than 31,000. James Glenday, ABC News, Washington.
And while the US president's planning to reopen his country, Britain has gone the other way, extending its lockdown for another 3 weeks. The government says lifting the restrictions too soon could cause a second peak in infections, force a new lockdown and hurt the economy.
We can't give a definitive time frame. That would be to prejudge the evidence. That wouldn't be a responsible thing to do. But our message to the British public is there is light at the end of the tunnel. We are making progress.
The British measures were introduced last month and include business closures, stay-at-home orders and a ban on gatherings of more than 2 people. The disgraced former New South Wales RSL president Don Rowe has avoided jail after being convicted of fraud. The 71-year-old was charged for using the organisation's credit card to pay for more than $9,000 of family phone bills. He also paid for a hotel room for his daughter. A Sydney magistrate today accepted that the veteran suffers post-traumatic stress disorder from Vietnam. He was fined $2,000.
I was horrified when I originally, as the Veterans Affairs Minister, heard about the allegations against Don Rowe. We pursued some significant changes to the RSL immediately afterwards, and I can only apologise to veterans and their families that they'd been let down so badly.
Rowe was also placed on a 2-year good behaviour bond. Help has arrived for some of the residents who lost their homes in the summer's horrific bushfires. It's come in the form of shipping containers, 110 of them converted into temporary houses. The pods, as they're known, are a lifeline for many who've been living in makeshift homes on their burnt-out land for months. Bushfire recovery reporter Philippa McDonald has this exclusive report from Hickey's Creek, northwest of Kempsey.
For a community that's done a lot of heavy lifting lately, the sight of a crane was like a beacon.
It's just great. It's wonderful. Yeah, it's going to be so good.
This converted shipping container will provide temporary accommodation for Louise Richardson and her family, who've been making do since fire destroyed their home 5 months ago.
When everybody was all right, nothing else mattered. It just didn't matter. It didn't matter that everything is gone. And I'm still a bit that way.
Uninsured, they only got the power back on a fortnight ago, and now they have emergency housing.
Oh, that's going to be great. It's going to be running water. I mean, it's got everything we're going to need. We can actually move home. It's just so good.
67 houses and more than a third of the Kempsey Shire Council area was destroyed in the fires.
It's been a huge challenge. At the moment, I think there's probably around 10 families that are probably really struggling.
The pods are jointly funded by the state government and Twiggy and Nicola Forest.
It'll have bedroom, it'll have the kitchen, it'll have its own power generation, water tanks. It allows you to put in place on someone's property a level of accommodation that will allow us to give them some time as they prepare the rebuild of their home.
$5 million is being spent on the rollout of 110 pods across the state to those most in need. The state government will hang on to them long after they're needed for future disasters.
It wasn't a large cottage, but it was a 3-bedroom. It was very cosy.
For Bob Broomham on the south coast, the New Year's Eve fire is something he'll never forget.
It was like a demon come out of hell, out to get death and destruction.
His friend and next-door neighbour died, and he lost livestock and his home.
The pod's been a lifesaver for us.
Yeah.
You know, in the last couple of weeks, ever since the pod's been here, it's allowed us to stay here more than just for the day. It means we're getting things done, we're looking after the stock.
There's a direction now, whereas before I think we all just felt like, what do we do? Like, it's just, where do we start?
A place to call home for now. Philippa McDonald, ABC News.
As Australians bunker down to help flatten the curve, authorities discussing long-term strategies for a return to normal life. National Science reporter Michael Slezak examines what an exit strategy might look like.
How does a nation in the grip of an emergency shutdown find a way out?
What we need to do is keep the restrictions in place and then slowly lift them.
To get people back on the streets, the Prime Minister says we need to do 3 things. The first is more testing. So far, we've just been testing people with symptoms of COVID-19 or other high-risk groups like return travellers. But now we need to try to test everybody. It's called sentinel testing, testing different people in different ways.
We might also test a sample of the community on a regular basis just to check whether the coronavirus has spread into the community and people are infected but they don't have any symptoms.
One very different way is to examine what's going down the toilet.
To spot an early outbreak that might occur that we might miss through other forms of testing. Also, the degree of viral load we might find in the faeces could give an idea of how severe the outbreak is.
The second part of the exit strategy is contact tracing. Once a person tests positive for COVID-19, massive nationwide teams track down everybody that person has interacted with. Small teams used to track cases of measles or HIV have been dramatically expanded. The government's also developing an app that will help authorities find anyone who's been in contact with confirmed cases. Today, refusing to rule out forcing everyone to share their location data.
I've always been a believer in the Australian people making the right decision, and so I think a voluntary approach at first is definitely the way to go.
Even with all those measures in place, outbreaks are still possible, and then the response becomes important. Australia is now in a much better position to contain an outbreak than it was when COVID-19 first arrived. We could see further use of the Defence Force, which was called in to help address an outbreak in Tasmania this week. Whatever the case, experts say patience will be required.
What this is really about is finding a way to fine-tune the degree of lockdowns, not in terms of finding our way out of this COVID-19 situation, which is going to go on for a while.
Michael Slezak, ABC News.
After 177 years, the oldest regional newspaper in New South Wales has printed its last edition, at least for now. The Maitland Mercury is one of dozens of local papers that have suspended printing during this coronavirus crisis. The owner insists the closures are temporary, but there are concerns the Mercury and others may not return.
The Maitland Mercury is suspending printing, and news agency owners, the Patfields, say customers fear it won't return.
They're worried it's not going to come back.
Starting in 1843, the paper has been there for all of Australia's major military conflicts, the rise of homegrown boxing hero Les Darcy, and Maitland's devastating 1955 floods. It's an icon of the community, but has struggled with readership.
A lot of old people like to read the Mercury.
We have to get online and we have to subscribe and we have to say this is an important part of our community.
All staff except the editor have been stood down. Most of its website will now be shared regional content. Emma Swain was a journalist with the paper for 20 years.
Probably most importantly for me, to be an advocate for those people who couldn't speak or couldn't be heard on any other platform.
She's worried the paper's role in holding local powers to account and recording history will quietly fade away.
There may not be the fight there to bring it back. Hopefully there will be, but I have my doubts.
The same owners have suspended at least 40 other titles across the state in response to plummeting ad revenue.
Australian Community Media says the closure of its regional newspapers, like the Maitland Mercury, is temporary, and it's assessing its eligibility for the government's JobKeeper program in what are very challenging times.
The writing was on the wall that there was some strife ahead, regardless of bushfires or coronavirus.
Whether this is the last page in the history of a local institution is yet another uncertainty of the COVID-19 era. Ben Millington, ABC News, Maitland.
To finance now, global share markets jumped today, even though China revealed its first fall in GDP in more than 4 decades. Traders were instead responding to President Trump's plan to reopen the US economy. Here's Alan Kohler.
China is always the first to report GDP each quarter, and it was the first to lock down because of the coronavirus. So while the rest of the world will be waiting for the June quarter GDP to see the damage, for China it was the March quarter, and GDP contracted by 6.8%. China started reporting quarterly GDP in 1992, and it's always since then kept growth above 6%. The last time it acknowledged a fall in GDP was 1976. The timing difference between China and the rest can be seen in this chart of share market indexes: the Shanghai Composite, the Australian All Ordinaries and the US S&P 500. Now, the Chinese market had its fall at the end of February after a 2-week closure, and it wasn't very much of a fall by comparison. The ASX and New York markets are climbing out of a much deeper hole. And they took another step out last night and today after President Trump laid out a plan to reopen the US economy. It was up 0.5% in New York, but more than 3% in Japan and Korea today, and 1.2% in Shanghai. It was affected by the GDP number. The Australian market went up 1.4% today, with Qantas and Sydney Airport leading the way after the Morrison government agreed to support the airlines. Virgin Australia, however, stayed in a trading halt. The US oil price slipped below $20 a barrel last night, while other commodities didn't move very much at all. And the Australian dollar bounced back above 63 US cents. And finally, just because it's Friday, here's a graph of the relative importance of a few things at the moment that's doing the rounds on social media. Up are the internet, alcohol and sweatpants, what we'd call tracky-dacks. Down are the car and shaving. Toilet paper was up and now down, and coffee unchanged, right up there at the top. And that's finance.
Golf officials have defended their decision to allow a number of courses to remain open during the coronavirus pandemic. In states where golf is allowed, record numbers of people have been hitting the course under strict physical distancing measures.
When it comes to outdoor exercise during this pandemic, many have been short of options. Gyms are closed and team sport is off. But one popular activity has been a smash hit.
Look, I think it's just the open space. Generally, you're in 100 plus acres of fresh air.
After a brief countrywide shutdown 3 weeks ago, many golf courses have cautiously reopened. Strict social distancing guidelines have been put in place with a maximum of 2 players per group.
Generally, golfers are a little bit older, so we do have to be careful, and clubs have to be aware of those 70 and over year olds, whether they do say to them, look, why don't you just stay away for another month or 2.
The sport has provided a welcome respite for those who'd otherwise be cooped up at home.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, I think that, it's a privilege that we're still getting to play golf and be outside. You get to the course, all the doors are open, you don't have to be in contact with anyone, you don't have to touch anything on the golf course, there's no rakes in the bunkers or anything like that, so it's literally just you and your equipment.
Despite some of the restrictions around playing conditions, there's been a huge spike in the amount of people playing golf. Some of the most popular courses around Australia are seeing social play booked out days in advance. Courses remain closed in the Northern Territory and Victoria due to tighter government restrictions in those states. Not everybody is happy about it.
Why in God's name can't Victorians play golf?
I didn't give Sam much thought, I must say. I'd love to be playing golf, we all would, but I don't need to play golf, and me playing golf is not worth someone's life.
The ones that have stayed open, I think, can see it's providing a really good opportunity for people to exercise. The mental benefits at the moment has been really important.
A peaceful way to fight this pandemic. Patrick Galloway, ABC News.
3 crew members from the International Space Station have returned to Earth to find a very different home planet from the one they left more than 6 months ago. The 2 Americans and 1 Russian touched down in Kazakhstan. They were greeted by a recovery crew to help them adjust to the increased gravity here after months in space. Returning crew always go through a rehabilitation program, but this time the Russian and American support teams have also implemented an isolation regime to protect the travellers from coronavirus. Let's take a look at the weather now, and mild and sunny conditions look to be coming to an end on Sunday, Graham.
Yes, they are, Jeremy. Ahead of it, though, another very pleasant Saturday on the way across not only Sydney but most of New South Wales. Now, in Sydney itself, we saw minimums above average this morning for all suburbs, but it was the maximums that were warmest compared to average. In fact, 28.1 in the city this afternoon was 6 degrees warmer than usual. Now, the cool southwesterly wind flow did keep temperatures about the western and southern parts of the state cooler than average, but in contrast, areas east of the ranges were substantially warmer, with Yamba, Casino, Ballina and Evans Head all 8 above average this afternoon. Now, we've got a high pressure system that's maintaining a dry and sunny forecast for most of the state tomorrow. We have got a trough about the northeast. Now, that could trigger some thundery showers. The trough itself will deepen and then it's going to slip a little bit further south during Sunday, and that's what's going to bring the potential of some cloud, thundery showers, particularly about parts of the coast between about Port Macquarie and Ulladulla. Now, Melbourne and Adelaide could see some isolated light showers, just a possible thundery shower around Brisbane, and Perth will become cloudy, but at this stage only patchy rain to begin with. So in New South Wales, a mostly dry and sunny day, apart from a possible thundery shower about the north coast and ranges and a possible late shower about the far south coast. So in the northeast, partly cloudy, particularly in that far north, with a possible thundery shower about and east of the ranges near the Queensland border. Mostly in the afternoon, should be mainly sunny elsewhere. And the stronger winds on the Hunter Waters are expected to remain mostly offshore. Now, any frost should be confined to the snowies tomorrow. We've got a mostly sunny day throughout, although there will be some cloud and even an isolated shower about the far south coast in the evening. We've also got strong winds on inshore Eden waters, and they'll tend gale force on the more offshore waters. Over the inland, it should be a dry day throughout. We have got a little bit of patchy cloud about the south and generally light southwesterly winds, which is once again going to help keep those maximum temperatures a little milder. We've got some fresh winds on Sydney waters in the morning, but they will ease off as we move into the afternoon. Our lows will range from 9 to 14 and our tops should reach a pleasant 21 to 25. Should be dry and sunny, a westerly breeze, but that will turn more southeast in the afternoon. Now, it's those onshore winds and that deepening trough that could trigger some showers, even an isolated coastal thunderstorm on Sunday. Now, for the most part, the showers are far more likely about the eastern parts of Sydney, particularly closer to the coast. We return back to dry and sunny next week. Jeremy.
Graham, thank you. And that is the very latest from the ABC News team. Thanks for your company. Enjoy the rest of your evening.